Welcome to this session. This session is on standard error. How far is the average sample mean deviates from the true population mean? Whether mean of a sample estimates the true mean of a population. These questions are answered by standard error. Now let us have a look at standard error. Standard error of the mean is the deviation of a sample mean from the population mean. Standard error is the standard deviation of the sampling distribution formed by the sample means. That is, it measures the accuracy of how a sampling distribution represents a population by using standard deviation. Before discussing in depth regarding standard error, just have a look into the differences between standard deviation and standard error. In the video on measures of variability, I have discussed standard deviation in detail with examples. What are some of the major differences between standard deviation and standard error? Standard deviation is a descriptive statistics, that is, description of data variability. It is a measure of how much the data are dispersed in relation to the mean, that is, deviation of scores or values from the mean. Standard error is an inferential statistic. Inferences are made from the data. Standard error measures the statistical accuracy of an estimate. Standard deviation is a measure of variability within a single sample, but standard error is a measure of variability across multiple samples of the same population. I will explain with this. Standard deviation is measure of variability within a single sample. Standard deviation quantifies the variation within a set of measurements. Standard deviation shows how spread out the values or scores are from each other. Low standard deviation means data are close to the mean. High standard deviation means data are more spread out from the mean. That is, large standard deviation shows larger variability around the mean. Standard error is the variability across multiple samples of the same population. Multiple samples of that is how far the sample mean is from population mean. If multiple samples are drawn from a single population and studied, there may be a difference between sample mean and population mean. Then next difference is in the calculation. Standard deviation is the square root of variance. That is the square root of the average squared deviation score. Standard error is calculated by standard deviation divided by square root of the sample size. Let us see how standard deviation is calculated. This I have already discussed with examples in a video. Steps to find out variance and standard deviation. Find the mean of the data x bar. Find each score's deviation from the mean. Subtract the mean from each value, that is x minus x bar. Square each deviation of the mean, x minus x bar whole squared. Find the sum of the squares, that is sigma x minus x bar whole squared. Divide the total by the number of items, that is variance, sigma x minus x bar whole squared by n. Take the square root of the variance, that is SD, that is standard deviation equal root of sigma x minus x bar whole squared by n. Standard deviation, again the standard deviation formula is root of sigma x minus x bar whole squared by n. Standard error is calculated by standard error equals standard deviation by root n. N is the number of samples. Low standard error means most sample means cluster around the population mean. High standard error means sample means are spread out over a wider range. This indicates sample mean is an inaccurate representation of the population mean. Figure. Low standard error, that is, again, most sample means cluster around the population mean, and high standard error sample means are spread out over a wider range. This figure depicts the sample size and standard error. From the figure, it is clear that as the sample size increases, standard error decreases. Sample size changes the standard error of the mean. Thus, standard error shows the variability between the means of different samples studied. In actual studies, it is not feasible to draw multiple samples from a population to estimate standard error. So, usually we study one sample and estimate the standard error. That's all regarding standard error. Thank you.